Good evening, and thanks for joining tonight's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments. For tonight, we're going to take a look at the first part of a three-part series where we're going to focus on grant writing, overview of grants, and funding sources. My name is Mike Houston, and I'm the moderator for this event. I teach algebra and calculus near Pittsburgh, where I use TI Technology to make tough-to-teach, tough-to-learn concepts accessible to all my students. Tonight, we're really lucky to be joined by our two panelists, Jenny Cesar and Doris Teague. Jen is a grant partnership consultant for Texas Instruments, and before coming to TI, she taught middle grades math and science for Carlton Farms Branch ISD. Jen also taught science, health, and special ed for Grant Cibola County Schools and was the curriculum development manager for the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, where she and her team created the content used in the Space Camp and Aviation Challenge programs, as well as unique learning experiences at the Space and Rocket Center Museum. Jen, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
I'm so glad to be here, and I'm really grateful to see we have so many attendees tonight. Thank you for coming.
And Doris has experience in the development and implementation of GEAR programs in Texas. Past experience as a teacher, supervisor, project coordinator, grant writer, and trainer. She is currently consulting with 5 GEAR partnerships and serves as a grants outreach consultant with Texas Instruments. Experience at local, state, and national venues, including the National Center for Community and Educational Partnerships, gives Doris a broad knowledge of education initiatives and practices. Doris, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're expecting a large crowd, so your audio is muted. Feel free anytime to send any questions to Doris or Jen using the Q&A window on the right side of your screen. We'll also be using the chat window to send general messages. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, and we'll provide a link to the event's certificate of attendance at the conclusion of the webinar. All right, Jen, I'm going to hand things over to you. So it's all yours. Feel free to share your screen.
All righty, here we go. There we go.
Okay. Well, this is Doris. Jen is running the screen, and so I'm going to talk for a little while, and then we'll toss it back to her. This is a workshop we've done several times for this particular venue, and we've done it in other places as well. In fact, lots of other places. We kind of got into this because people always ask us, you know, we'd like to have this technology, or we'd like to have this or that for our classroom, and we're not sure. We just don't have money. You know, schools always don't have money for new, innovative things that they haven't budgeted for. And so we said, you know what, you should write a grant for that. There's a lot of grant money out there. So we started working on this, and we've had a lot of really good response, and we've had a lot of teachers, and we've had a lot of districts that have written some grants. So we hope that we're bringing you some things that maybe you thought out and that will be helpful to you as you maybe have a wish list that you're trying to fulfill. So we'll be with you to talk about an overview of just general information tonight about grants. Here's Jen's information from Texas Instruments and my information, and we invite you after this workshop. You can access this PowerPoint, and we invite you to get in touch with us if you decide you want to write a grant or you want some, you know, technical assistance on one. So there's our information. We're more than happy to help. As we move through this, we're kind of wondering who is out there. So you may be one of the people who's out there who's just brand new and just thinking about, oh, it'd be great if we had a little extra money, some grant money. So some of you are probably brand new to grant writing. Some of you maybe have experience. You've either written a grant yourself, or you've served on a team that wrote a grant in a district. either way, we think we have some things here that will help you. For those who are new, this is something you can think about and share with your teammates. And for those of you who are experienced, we hope you'll join us and weigh in with some of your with your expertise as well as we go through this. Or maybe you're looking for something that will help you do a grant workshop in your district. We're going to give a little overview about grant writing, just some general ideas. We've distilled it down into some of the most important points, we think. We're going to look at some funding sources tonight, some places that are some good search engines where you can tap into some of the types of grants that you might be interested in. We'll look at the importance of bringing some data to your grant writing so that you have good, reliable sources of documentation about your needs and the type of district and the goals and objectives you're seeking to write. And we'll end with some elements of success for writing grants. There's no guarantee that just because you write a grant, you'll be funded, but there's some things you can do in advance that will give you like a better chance at a grant acceptance. So the very first thing that we're going to talk about tonight is, for those of you who are brand new, the types of grants that are out there. There's, oddly enough, in this particular education climate, there's a lot of grant money out there. There's all sorts of things that are being funded, and so that's a good thing for you. As we move through here, you'll know that how important it is to be focused on what you're looking for. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of grants that exist out there. There are some grants. Most grants are competitive in that you're going to write a grant and you're going to compete with some other people who are writing the same grant, who are in the whether it's a federal grant or it's possibly a state grant. But competitive grants mean that they've given a set of criteria for the grant, and they want you to answer the questions, and then depending on the types of narrative and the types of how strong your grant is, then you'll be awarded, and you'll be competing, as I say, against other people who are writing the same grant. Federal grants, there's a lot of federal money out there for grants. There's money for technology that's embedded into the needs of what you're looking for. There's some things that are technology grants, but they also have to satisfy a need. There's hardly anything out there, either federal or state, that's just going to let you buy technology. It'll have to be technology that satisfies a certain need, like maybe you have to need to improve their in algebra. Maybe you have students who are not taking enough advanced courses, and so there will be some grants out there along those lines. The federal grants are more comprehensive and more difficult to write, but they often are accompanied by several years of funding, and so if you're looking at those and you do get awarded a federal grant, it will be a sizable amount of money. There's also some competitive grants that come from your state department usually, and they usually have attached to them a formula for funding. Like your title, all of your title funds would come from your state department. Your state is allocated a certain amount of money, and then they send out applications to school districts to apply for that money. And so it's usually based on a formula of a certain amount of money per student. So while those are a little easier to write because they're more straightforward and they're a little more structured, you're still in a competitive nature with other people who are writing the same type of grant. And then the last type of grant that you might run into out there would be foundations or private money. It would be one of the largest would be the Gates Foundation, and that's, that funding is very difficult to come by, but it is definitely it's definitely well worth looking into. Maybe you have foundations or companies or in your area that are willing to fund educational initiatives. And so those private funds usually come with a grant that's not as complicated as state and federal grants, but it's important in those grants to know your funders and exactly what they're looking for and what they will fund. And those foundations usually have a pretty straightforward a grant application, a fill in the blank, so to speak, and that funding is usually for a finite amount of time, for example, a year usually, maybe as much as 2, but usually just a year. So those are the types of grants that are out there, and we encourage you, we're going to give you some sources of places to look for grants, so we encourage you to look at all different types of grants because there's never just one way to do any of this. Jen, I'm gonna leave you to talk about the components of a good grant.
Okay, so every grant has some basic components. Now, some of them will have, especially the larger grants, they're going to have more of these items that are listed here, and your smaller grants typically will have a lot less. So when you look at the basic components of a grant, there's usually some type of summary or an abstract, or they might call it an introduction. Now, sometimes that can be a completely separate section, or it may simply be a letter of intent that you're writing indicating that, giving the funder an idea of what you're trying to propose and, some of the basics of your proposal. Then you have the statement of need or the problem that you're trying to address. And that's where you're going to have, you're going to incorporate the research around why this need exists, or research around the solution that you're trying to provide. Then, of course, you've got to have your objectives. That's how you're going to go about meeting the need with whatever the grant funder provides you with. And included in that might be a very detailed section, depending on the size of the grant, on the methods that you're going to use, your grant design, your management plan. For if you're doing a classroom grant, you are the management plan. However, if you're doing a large grant, like a federal grant or a state level grant, you may have to hire personnel to manage that grant. So you have to have a plan of who's doing what in the grant, in addition to what it is exactly you're going to do. So one of the ways to think of this, as educators, grant writing is something that you're already predisposed to do really, really well. And the reason for that is because you write unit and lesson plans. And so a grant proposal is really a more formulaic version of a lesson plan addressing a particular targeted need or group of needs that work together. And then your management plan would be if it required you to have more than just yourself as the teacher involved in that. Which takes us to the next basic component of a grant, which is your evaluation piece. And that's how you go about identifying the methodology for which you're going to evaluate the success or the lack of success of your grant. Now understand, some grants are research-based. And so your proposed solution to meet the need may not be successful. And that doesn't mean that the grant funder is going to look at your grant as a failure because they're funding the research around it to know what works and what doesn't work. Another part of grants oftentimes is future funding and sustainability. Now what that is addressing is if they're going to give you money, the last thing they want to do is give you money for a one-off that's not going to be repeatable by somebody else, doesn't add to the body of knowledge, or you're doing something that to repeat it the following year or after the grant runs out, you have to find all this huge extra money. So you have to think about and provide some information about how you intend to keep it going. Benefit of doing a sustainability plan especially one that incorporates partners or funding, whether it's in-kind or dollar match from partners, is that it shows that you're expanding the reach of your grant. And now instead of just impacting a particular small group, you are incorporating community. And that's a very important part that funders like to know about. Then you have your budget, and then your budget is where you're going to detail out the different pieces to your grant, where the money's going to go, where additional funding might come from. And it's your budget that really informs a funder as to whether or not you know what you're doing. And then, of course, you're going to have your conclusion section where you're drawing conclusions. The key conclusion that you need to bring about in your proposal is the urgency of your need and the urgency for them to fund you. And then, of course, you have an appendices. Now, the appendices is very important because many grants are narrowed down to the number of pages that you can have. They will narrow it down to, if they tell you 1-inch margins and it's 1.5 spacing and the size of a font, and you have to stick to that, because if you don't, the first way they eliminate a grant is to stick the ruler up, measure the sides, and check your font. And if you're not in alignment with the instructions, they don't even read your proposal. And so a lot of the research and supporting documentation you don't have room for in the grant proposal itself, so you reference it and you include it in an appendices. So it's a way to get information in kind of under the radar, if you will.
You know what, Jen has given you a really good explanation of all the possible components in a grant. It might not all be in there, but the really important thing to remember is that you tell people what you're going to do and then why you're going to do it, what the problem is, how you're going to solve it, and then you continue as you go through the different parts to tell them again, just so just so you reiterate over and over again, this is what we're planning to do, this is why we need to do it, because readers, well, they read one part and then they go on to another part, and sometimes they forget what they've read, so keep telling them.
Sometimes they'll even split the grant out, and so you'll have different people reading different parts, which is one reason why you want to be very careful not to use, for example, teacher speak. Or if you do use teacher speak or acronyms, that every section that you use it, you have defined it in that particular section. So what I now have is just a little bit more detail about these different parts. So when you look at the executive summary or that abstract, or your letter of introduction, this is the big picture of your overall proposal. And it includes the total amount of whatever your request is, and it's the first view of any proposal that your reviewers will see. But if you'll notice the parts in red there, it's the part you write last. And the reason you write this part last is in order to condense something down to a page or 2 pages, depending on the length of the grant and the size of the grant, you really have to have a very clean and concise understanding of exactly what you're going to do in order to narrow it down to, these are the 3 key things that we're going to do with this money that you're going to give us. So you write this piece last, but it will be the first thing that they see. Then you have your statement of need, and the reality is that is the bulk of your proposal is going to be contained in this statement of need, because this is where you are providing that reviewer with an understanding of the problem. It's where you're providing them with an understanding of who your target audience is. It's helping them to see the research that you have compiled, not only to figure out the problem, but also why you've chosen the particular solution that you have. So this is where it's the meat of your proposal. The methodology helps them to understand the steps and the timeline that you're getting to, but they have to understand why it's a need in the first place. And so this is where you really hook them. Then you have your project description. So that's all the objectives, the methods, management, evaluation. So those are the little detail pieces. But each one helps them to build that mental image of exactly what it is you're trying to do. So you might incorporate in this a timeline that says, in September we're doing this, and in October we're doing this, with your activities and things that you're doing. This is also where you're going to show, this is our pre-evaluation, our mid-evaluation, our post-evaluation. You're going to outline how you're going to build that sustainability in, and then what are the objectives? What are the goals? So that they can really see it in their head, because if they can't understand it, they're not going to fund it. That's plain and simple. I'm sure most of you at some point in time have experienced someone trying to tell you about something, but they're very vague on it. So it's kind of like sticking an elephant under a sheet. You think it's an elephant, you can kind of see the shape, but you don't know for sure. So in your project descriptions, where you're going to get into your details.
And you know what, Jen? Can I just add this? That it's a really good point if you're writing a grant at this point in time to have someone else read it too at that point and say, someone who's not involved, who hasn't been in on the conversations about it, have them read it and tell back to you what you're trying to do, why you need this grant, how you plan to go about managing it, what your objectives are, how you're going to sustain it, and have them read it and then say, by what I read, this is what you're trying to do. And then you've got someone who's very objective about it, giving you some feedback.
And it also, that's a really great point, Doris, because it also helps for that person. They'll point out where you're using teacher speak. Every industry has their own kind of little language, and that includes teachers. As professionals, we use words like differentiated instruction and multiple intelligences and things like that someone who's not in the field of education may not have no clue what those mean. And so we want to make sure that we're not using terminology that another educator understands, but somebody in the business community who has nothing to do with it may not get. And that brings us to budget. So the budget, you'll notice you write that first. And the reason for this is because it's not only going to save you time and energy in the writing phase, it really clearly helps you to define what it is you can do, and it defines it for the funder as well. Now, I say that because the reason it defines what it is you're going to do is if you're asking for a certain amount of money and you have this broad idea of all these field trips you're going to take or these activities you're going to do and this equipment that you're going to buy, when you break it down in a budget, you're able to see whether or not you can actually afford all those things. The budget it's a lot like if you've ever given high school students or middle school students the opportunity to sit down and try to do a budget for themselves. They remember rent and they remember utilities, but then they forget groceries or gas money. So in the same sense, your budget is really going to inform what you can do based on the amount of money that you're asking for or how much money they're offering. If the grant has a dollar value limit on the awards, you have to figure out your proposal within that budget, unless you've got additional funders that you already know you're getting funded from. So you tend to write this first. You'll go back and add more detail to it, but in writing this first, it helps you to understand clearly what you can and can't do.
Yep, that's a great explanation, Jen. The budget is super important, and my experience has been just almost the opposite for teachers, is because we've gotten by with so few dollars that we don't quite know how to spend the grant money. And so I'll say, well, you have this many thousands of dollars. Who are your personnel going to be? And a lot of times, they can't even think about how many people it might take to carry out the grand plans they've written in these objectives. So it really helps. Jen is absolutely right. It really helps to do that budget first and say, well, we'll have this many personnel units, we'll have this many, we'll need this much for sub fee. We'll need professional development. We need equipment. So all of those things are really important to do first, and then it makes it easier to do the rest of the grant.
Yep. Thanks, Doris. And that's the one thing, as you're writing, Doris made a really great point about the fact that we tend to shy away from spending money as teachers. They're giving you money. That's the whole point of this. So actually spend that money. So when you think, obviously you can't have a $9,000 hammer, but that doesn't mean that, you try to do everything on a shoestring budget. What they really want to see is that you've got a well thought out program or plan that you're going to implement, and that you're going to do it realistically, reasonably, but effectively. So if you underfund yourself by, you don't think about getting enough staff, or you undersell your, we're going to get equipment, but we're not going to think about professional development because we'll figure out how to use it. Those are not things that build that effectiveness in. So be sure in your budget that you look at all the facts and are realistic, because you want to be successful. So now we're going to go and Doris is going to take over talking, but I'm going to drive, and we're going to go actually and look at a few grant sites. So I'm going to come out of the PowerPoint. Actually, we'll go one more slide over.
Yeah, while Jen is shifting over to that, these are just a few of the sites that are out there. We can give you more. For the benefit of just the time we have to spend with you, we can give you a few of these, and honestly, these are search engines that are going to take you to lots and lots of other sources. But it is really important to know, Jen, you want to start with Get Ed funding?
Yep.
There? Okay. This one, the first one that's on the list is called Get Ed funding. And those of you who are looking for grants probably know all about this site because it's very popular in education. You can find at this site, you can find federal grants. You can find probably some allocated for just certain states. You can find foundation grants. So there's going to be a lot of different sources of monies at this particular site. And here's what you do. When you get to this site, it's going to ask you to register. It doesn't cost anything. It's not going to bill you month after month. It's a free site, but it does ask you to register. And so you'll go up to that part and you'll register your name. I think you have to put a password. It's pretty simple. And then you'll be into the site. And when you're into the site, then you can see, this is Jen's already logged in here. So then we know that you can go to this spot right here, and you can do a custom search for whatever you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for middle school math, or maybe you're looking for something in the humanities, or maybe you're looking for the technology and to solve a problem that you have. You can go into this custom search, and you can say, I either want the national site, which is going to give you everything in the world that exists, or you can narrow it down by state. You can just put in your state. And the reason that's kind of important is because if you go into it and you put the national, that's good. It's going to give you lots and lots of response. But it's also going to give you some grants that you don't qualify for in your state. So it's probably a good idea. We're in Texas, so I ordinarily put in Texas. But if it's you can put in whether you're a private school, a public school, a charter school, a home school, any of those, by checking those particular filters, and then you can put in the grade levels that you're interested in. If the reason I'm going to encourage you not to go down this list and check all is because no matter what your search is that you put in, when you enter that, it's going to start generating lists of grant opportunities, and they're going to come to your inbox like crazy. So you probably don't want to do all of those. You probably want to narrow it down to the grade levels and the disciplines and the focus areas that you're interested in. You can do custom searches on this, and you can name your custom search. Like you can say, this is the custom search I'm doing for summer school technology or summer school STEM in middle school. And you can name that search. And then the next time you go in, you can it will be there, and you can build another custom search. Maybe for the next one, you want something with scholarships that are available to students, in high school. And so maybe you want that, and that's what you'd call that one is, I want high school scholarships or college scholarships. And so then when you do your search, so Jen is showing us here that she's put in a search, and it has generated 12 different items that match her particular search criteria. And then you go down, you scroll down to each of those, you click right here on each of them, or sometimes I'm thinking click here. You can also click here for read more. But usually click on the name of it, and it will send you to the site where that particular grant is spelled out. And you can read about it. You can read the amount they're funding. You can read the deadlines for applying. You can read who is eligible for that. What the timeline is of when those grants or when applications can be accepted. And also, really importantly, is the states that could qualify for this. Sometimes you'll get real excited about a grant and you'll say, oh, that's just great. I love that. Like a Monsanto grant, that's really awesome. But sometimes if you read the fine print on this, it can only go to cities where there is a Monsanto plant located, even though it may say, it's in a certain state. So you have to read carefully through this to be sure that you qualify. But please don't take that as discouragement. There are tons of grant applications on these Get Ed funding sites. So we've had a lot of people who have used this site and really gotten some large and some small. And I will tell you, the small grants are really important too, because the more of those small grants you write, the more confident you get, and the more you can state that in a new grant application. You can say, we've gotten this grant from Boeing, and we've managed it successfully. And so even those small grants will help you get larger grants in the later applications.
Yeah.
So Jen,
Doris,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add in, one of the other benefits that I really like about this particular website is when you click on a location, it also includes the contact info. Mm-hmm. So if you're not sure if you want to take the time to apply or whether you might qualify or you're kind of unsure, you can always contact the contact person and just kind of ask them, is this something that they might fund? And if not, they'll give you information back that can help you with that. And then you can save and forward these things. And the fact that it gives you the deadlines is also really nice because you can see how often you might be able to apply for something.
And it's also going to tell you, a lot of times it'll send you to a website and it will show you what grants or what projects were funded in the past. So you can get examples from that about what other education programs have been funded. And I always like to see that. I always like to think, well, we might want to do something similar or we might want to do something totally different, but it gives me a good idea of what they're looking for. So I highly recommend the getedfunding.com. Okay. So Jen, you want to go to the grants.gov? Okay. All right. So this is, oh my goodness, this is all of the federal grants. They are posted all day, every day, lots and lots of these. And again, you also in this one you want to get in on their listserv for the ones that you're looking for. This is a really great site because, as again, what you're seeing in front of you now, you can enter keywords and it'll pull up. Then look at the list. It just goes on and on and on with the different types of grants. Here's the deal, though. Some of these, here's what they do in this site. You need to go over and be sure and filter it for education or for even for closer to the grade levels you're looking at. Because look, if you put STEM in there, look at all the possibilities of things you're going to get. You're going to get everything from setting up lab experiments in a business. You're going to get everything from everything related to STEM use and STEM education and STEM cells. I mean, it just goes on and on. So you have to be pretty specific about what you're looking for. Like STEM skills in education would be a good choice, So then you would know that, it was going to send you to some education grants. But the thing about the grants.gov is this covers grants from everything in the government, everything the government could possibly fund in any kind of grant. So you want to be real careful and specific about your searches there. Again, you could end up getting a lot of replies from them about things that you couldn't possibly apply for. So I highly recommend this site, but I also recommend that you be very specific in your choices.
Yep. With the GetEd funding, when you go in and do a custom search on that one, it's a lot like online dating. You want to not filter too much or you're not going to get a date. On the grants.gov site, think of this as a site with a lot of bad dates, and so you want to make sure to filter them out. So they're kind of flip-flop.
Yeah, I'm just looking over this list. It's just amazing the number of things out there that could be funded.
Yeah, and that does bring to mind the fact that when you're looking for a grant, you might be thinking of doing something in one particular way, but as you're looking at what funding is out there, there might be a way for you to tweak your idea to match a different style of funding or a different type of funder. Just to keep, so for example, if you're looking to do something in STEM, depending on what you're willing to incorporate, you might find funding from an environmental agency if you incorporate outdoor things, or if you do something related to health. There's community health and wellness programs that have grant funding out there that you could qualify for. So be willing to be open and think out of the box. Okay.
And then, let's see, do we want to show another one, or are we? I'll tell you what, I think we'll go to, all right, so we've given you in our PowerPoint several different sources. And honestly, if you'll go to those and look through those, you'll see that there's quite a few. Some are federal grants, some are research grants. National Council of Teachers of Mathematics has grants. We've given you just a few of the many search engines that are out there.
And just to add to that, if you're looking to do small grant, maybe a classroom set of technology for just your classroom, don't forget that there are grants and then there are donation places. So you could also do donorschoose.org, adoptaclassroom.com. So there are, for very small things, there are a variety of opportunities. NCTM has small grants that are not given to the school; they're actually awarded to the teacher. So the grant would be directly to you. So if you purchase technology with that grant, that's your technology to go with you wherever you go. So if you moved schools, that funding could go with you. Large grants, on the other hand, whatever you get, they tend to be awarded to the school or the district, in which case that equipment, that technology, whatever belongs to the school or district.
Absolutely. And what you'll see, honestly, to boil this page down, look at each one, find out, is this just, a huge grant? And if it is, honestly, get some help writing it. Go to get help through a university or for sure, let me just say this before we ever sign off. If you're in a classroom or a department chair or whatever, and you want to write a grant, be sure you go to your principal and be sure the principal gets it cleared through the district before you write one, because you don't want to put all that work into something and then later on say, oh, you know what, we can't, our district isn't able to support that or isn't able to have the personnel, in the budget department to support that. And so then you've done a lot of work and gotten your hopes up, and it may or may not come true. Most of the time, schools are really interested in grants, and they're really interested in you spending your time to do that. But be sure that you get permission, because you're going to need to use their nonprofit credentials, and you're going to have to get the financial office to sign off on it as well too. And usually they require a superintendent's signature. So be prepared to make a good presentation about what it is you're hoping to do. Just trying to save you a little time down the road.
Exactly. This is not a case of do first and ask for forgiveness.
Okay.
So you ready to look at some data sources?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with data sources, whether you're looking for a solution or you're looking for data about your need, whatever that need is, there are a couple places that you can go. It might help if I actually open the full PowerPoint here. So let me do that. There we go. Everything works just a little bit slower with WebEx. Okay, so in the data sources, you've got a couple places you can go. For example, data about demographics, about the community that you're serving. For example, how many computers are in households versus households without, the average education level of your community or your district. The Census Bureau is going to be a great wealth of information related to that type of data. And then you've got testing data. Now, most school districts have an assessment office, and that assessment office manages to keep data about your particular school, your students, your teachers, so forth. If you can't find it at your district office, your State Department of Education is going to have that data broken down by district for every district in the state. If you're looking for data on TI technology, because obviously we're TI, so we want you to be purchasing TI technology, but if you need research to support why you need a particular piece of technology or why you want to spend grant money on TI professional development, we have a very extensive research library, and it's not research that TI did that, says, yes, TI is wonderful, let's pat ourselves on the back. This is research that's gold standard, which means every industry out in the market looks at it as quality research. It's university-level research. It's research by companies that do nothing but research in a wide variety of areas, and so they've done research on the professional development, research on the implementation of TI technology in different classrooms. They've done generic research on graphing technology across the board. Things like that. So we have a wealth of information there. Then you have national organizations, of course, like NCTM, NSTA, ASCD. Those national organizations also have research on best practices, pedagogy, and so forth. And then the What Works Clearinghouse. When you're looking for solutions, you also have to have a good idea of the solution you want to implement and what kinds of solutions are the best solutions. The What Works Clearinghouse is a government clearinghouse that keeps a record of very well vetted solutions to a wide range of problems. They keep research data, They keep a list of programs that have been vetted. And so that's a great place if you've got a particular problem and you're trying to figure out, maybe the problem is student engagement, and you've got a particular population that you're looking at. You can go to the What Works Clearinghouse and find information on research or a solution that was implemented in a place similar to yours to see what worked. What did they do? How did they do it? So we're going to go and take a little peek at some of these sites real quick. Just want to make sure we stay on track with the time.
While we're looking at that next slide, a lot of the grants that we see that are coming out now that are federal grants are asking for your grant to include some citations from the What Works Clearinghouse, from citations that illustrate what other places have done and why you think that's a viable choice for your particular grant application. Now look, this is all when you're writing really big grants. When you're writing a small grant for like $3,000 or $5,000, usually you're just going to write what you're going to do. You're going to get the objectives. You're going to get a good budget going. It's not going to be the same for a small grant as it is for one of the larger grants. So we're trying to give you all the examples, but don't get scared off because you don't always have all of these pieces in every grant.
Exactly. And for the research part, just to help reiterate what Doris is saying, you are a professional. That's why you have a license, you're state licensed. If you have a national teacher certificate, you're nationally licensed. So you're as much a professional as a doctor is. And so your opinion and your observation also count as research, which is why in a small grant, they don't necessarily need you to go find, some study done by Ohio State University on, the effects of graphing calculators in middle grades, algebra. That's nice if you pull it up and it fits what you're trying to do, but it's not a requirement usually in a small grant because your observation as a teacher alone, when I do this, this works. When I don't do that, it doesn't work. That counts as that. But these are some great places to go. So we got the What Works Clearinghouse here, and you can see, depending on there's a whole range of topics, everything from, what works in charter schools, what do we do about behavior, pathways to graduation, things that improve teacher quality. So if you're a district person and you're trying to see what can you do to retain better teachers or to help your teachers to improve, there's stuff on that. There's mathematics. There's things to do with special needs students that you wouldn't necessarily do with regular ed students. But there's a whole slew of information about projects and research that works there. And we're down to about 8 minutes, so I want to make sure to hit on a couple of these others. There's the Census Bureau. So when you think about the Census Bureau, I like this splash page right now because it looks at median household income, poverty rates, and computer and internet use. Because, for example, one of the things TI likes to do when we're working with low-income students is we provide software. And that's great in some places, and then in other places it's not a great idea because students don't even have access to a computer at home. So being able to go and look and see what your demographics are, who's involved, who has what, what's the median income, what's the education level of the people that you're working with. The Census Bureau is a wealth of data on all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. It is. And honestly, it's so interesting because you can learn more about your own local community than you ever thought you could. And it gives trends over time, too. So that's pretty interesting, too.
Yep. And then we have, let's go here. What's this next one? So looking at, for example, I pulled up Dallas ISD. So if you're needing, your local testing data about your district, you can go in and you can pull whatever the local assessment was, so your end of course exams, you can look at your SAT and your ACT, you can look at state and national assessments. Maybe you're trying to do professional development, and so you can contact your assessment office and find out How many teachers do you have that have just a bachelor's degree? How many have a master's or a doctorate? How many came through in alternative certification? And so your assessment office is also a wealth of information. And then, let's see. You also have the TEA. So for those of you in Texas, now if you're in a different state, your state Department of Ed is also going to have the same things. It's going to have not only your grant opportunities, so that's another site to look for funding that's not on our list, but you can look by performance. You can look at, go back to student testing and accountability, if I can get this thing to work for me.
Yeah, a lot of times in your school districts, remember when I talked about those different types of grants, competitive grants, they will list there the grants that are available, and any more in state education agencies. They're doing more of, instead of writing a completely full-blown grant, they're asking for letters of intent. So your district or your campus might write a letter of intent that they would like to apply to do something. And then what happens is most of the education agencies are now contacting back people who write a letter of intent, and they'll say, we think you've got a really great idea and you got the right population to achieve this, and we'd like to help you furthermore fill out a more extensive grant. So then you've got help finishing the rest of it. But that's really more of a trend nowadays, is that letter of intent rather than an application, a big grant application.
Yep. And when you go and look, that letter of intent helps them to clarify. But it's it really depends on whether you're doing a large grant, small grant, what amount of data you want to incorporate. So I'm going to take us from data sources because we're about near the end of our time together. This goes with that data source, and when you get the PowerPoint, make sure to take a copy of this and just put it into Word. But this is called All About Your Data, and we say to keep this in a drawer and update it every so often, because a lot of this information isn't going to change, but it's information that you may often need, especially for larger grants. Obviously, school and district name, that's kind of a given. History of your school and your community. How did your community form? What, some information about the background. Recent economic issues. So, for example, in Kentucky, they've had a change in industry. Coal mining has gone away, and so in those rural communities, they now have to find alternative things to be training kids for because that industry is gone. And so now what are those kids going to do? And what are they going to do to raise the economic status of the community? So when businesses close, or maybe you had something else happen, natural disaster like the hurricanes that have wiped out communities. So those types of things are going to create an economic issue. You need a description of your school and your student population. That's really important there because it helps to make your students real to the reviewer. If they can't envision your kids, they don't develop a sense of urgency about the real need. It's when you think of like those SPCA commercials or the Feed the Children commercials, what do? They make it real. They introduce you to a child and you see the child in their conditions, and so they're making it real to you. And they make it, they play the sappy music and show the child not necessarily, in the clean clothes and so forth, because they want you to feel urgent about doing something about it. And it's the same thing with your grant proposal. You're trying to help them to see who you're working with.
And all this takes time together. It takes time, so gather it, keep it, use it for the next grant so that you have it all and you'll have to start all completely over again because it takes a while. So,
exactly. Yeah. So as you go through this, it's not something that you necessarily are going to fill in the blank. It's not something you're going to write out each and every time, but if it asks for it, you already have the info in a drawer that you can pull out and go, oh yeah, so we got our mission statement from blah, 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 and you can incorporate that into it. Current and past grant awards, keeping track of that. Funders like to know that you know what you're doing. Now, whether the award was given to you or to your school or to your district, if they're asking if you've received any past awards or what your history is, you would want to get a list of what grants from your grant office so that you could incorporate that in there, because it shows a funder that you know what you're doing. Any existing programs or initiatives. Maybe you're writing an after-school program for School B because School A has an after-school program that's really successful and you want to duplicate it. So knowing what's already there, they're not going to say, oh, well, you already got one, we're not going to fund you, because you're looking to expand on something that's already working. And then number 9 is a really great one. If you're looking for partners, especially for sustainability, or because you have a community component to a grant proposal, having a list of like the top 10 businesses in your community or the top largest businesses within your area are great. It's great information to keep handy, and it helps you to be ready to fill in information as you need. So that takes us to elements of success.
Okay, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to say that we've hit on a lot of these, clearly stating what your need is, being able to put that out there so people can remember what the name of your grant is that you try to name it something so that they can remember it when they read through the application. Build a mental picture of why you need it and what your solution is. Be sure that you've got a detailed, reasonable budget. You can look at these when you get this and think, let's go back and use this as a pretty good checklist to see if we've got everything that we need in our grant. So listen, we have totally enjoyed, our time is up, but we have totally enjoyed having you join us tonight. Again, here's our contact information, Jen and Doris, and we're more than happy to answer questions or to help you search. The more we know about what you're looking for, the more we can help you find it too. So we're going to toss it back to Michael, and we thank you very much for coming, and please join us for part 2. Check with the listing of the webinars, and we hope you'll continue with us on part 2.
Yep. And just to add something else, if you shoot us an email, we also are doing a quarterly newsletter where we will be including some tips and tricks about grant writing and also current funding opportunities. So I can send you the one that we just sent out if you contact us, and that'll get you on our list for the next one when we put it out in February.
Good deal. Good night.
Great. Thanks so much, all. We are going to wrap things up here in a couple minutes. As we are wrapping things up, I do want to share a couple things that are available on our website, education.ti.com. And a few minutes ago, Doris had mentioned that there's a part 2 coming up. And if you want to check out when that's going to be or how to register for it, visit our website, and under the Professional Development tab, slide down to Webinars. And then middle of your screen, there's a live Cubed Webinars link, so you can click on that, and you can see all the upcoming webinars we have, specifically for grant writing. January 17th and January 31st will be parts 2 and part 3. So please feel free to visit our website to learn more about those upcoming webinars. You can register for any and all that you find interesting. So we hope you check those out. Right now, we have a current promotion called the Extra Credit promotion, and that is allowing teachers that to do things that they already do in their classroom to get prizes from Texas Instruments that help motivate you along the way. So for doing things that you already typically do, like taking a webinar tonight, you can earn entries, and those entries, more entries, will give you a greater chance at earning prizes. So tonight's entry for the webinar and this is not case sensitive. It's all one word. It's Get Funding. I'm going to put that in the chat window. Again, it's Get Funding. So please feel free to visit tiextracredit.com to learn more about that, as well as to enter that code for tonight, Get Funding. To receive a certificate of attendance, I'm going to have you click the link in the chat window. Also listed is a link for the documents that were used tonight by Doris and Jen. A few of you had asked about those documents, so please feel free to visit that link. You should be able to get those tonight. In the event that the link or links aren't working for any reason, feel free just to hang tight. You'll automatically get a follow-up email within a couple days, and in that follow-up email should be a link to the recording, as well as links to the certificate and the documents. And if you're watching this on demand, go ahead and copy that link into your favorite browser to receive your certificate. Thanks so much, Jen and Doris, for everything you shared tonight. I know I appreciate it, and it was great to see everyone on tonight, so thanks so much for everything. We hope to see everyone back online after the holidays. Have a great night.